Welcome to Epistemology Online, where the idea is to get people to articulate what they believe to be true and false, good and evil, and their rationale behind it. Hopefully, a different way of discourse online. This is part 2 of 3, Talking with John. Okay, so while we were talking just a minute ago, you were telling me that the Constitution is a binding document. So how confident are you in that, just in a scale of 0 to 100, for example?
Man, I hate to appear so confident.
Nothing wrong with being confident.
I have to say 10 because it is the supreme law of the land. It's our governing document, you know? All of the laws have to abide by the Constitution.
Well, you broke up a little bit right there. Can you repeat that last bit? It kind of chopped up a bit.
Any other law that's passed in America has to not contradict the Constitution in order to be valid. So it's our standard. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what's kind of like the primary evidence that the Constitution is a binding document in your view?
Kind of, can you kind of define binding? Like, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So if we had a contract, you and I, to, buy a cell phone from me, and it said, I'm going to sell you my cell phone and you'll pay me $100. I think a binding contract would be one that maybe you sign, I sign. If it's a really big amount, maybe like even a third party signs so we can prove that it happened. If I was doing a big enough deal, I might even want like video evidence of the person saying, yeah, I'm totally down with this. I'm not under duress. I'm not, there's not some guy like threatening to do something to me if I don't sell this particular item. I would consider that a binding contract because it shows kind of consent of all the parties involved.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what our government is based off, is government by consent. And all of our states, 13 at the time, all signed it by ratifying it. So they agreed to it. It's binding. I would absolutely say it's binding. I forget what your original question was now, but...
Well, what makes it binding? It sounds like you're saying because some people signed it, therefore it binds all people to it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when it was written, and then there was a big old debate on whether it's actually going to be ratified. And by the act of ratification, every state agreed to it, and that makes it binding on them. And and by being a citizen, your particular state or your particular country in America live under the rules of the Constitution.
Gotcha. And I like some of them. Like I like the Bill of Rights for some of them, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. I dig that for sure. So I'm glad for that part of thing. But there's a lot more to the Constitution than like the Bill of Rights. Like, Bill of
Rights, honestly,
a whole bunch of rules inside of it.
The Constitution.
Right. It was the first 10 amendments. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question at this point would be like, is that ethic or principle, I guess, probably not ethic, but principle, universal? Like, can I, for example, represent another person and sign on their behalf? Whenever we may not have met, maybe you disagree with my particular viewpoints on things, that sort of thing.
So like representative government, is that universal?
Not necessarily the concept of representative government, because I know that's a lot deeper than just the Constitution, but just particularly the idea of the Constitution being signed by X number of people. If I can recreate that, or not me particularly, but if somebody else recreated that, would that be equally binding or would it be less binding, and kind of why?
Like within the United States, if like me and you got together and signed some sort of document that we're going to abide by certain rules.
Sure.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think contracts are binding. I think state constitutions are just as binding, just they govern a smaller sub-government of our federal government. So why not? They wouldn't be equally as binding. I would say that anything that's in the state laws or state constitutions or federal laws that's passed under the federal constitution, because there's a hierarchy, as long as they don't obviate or contradict the constitution, they're good to go. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try to find an edge case. This is kind of not a topic I was really thinking about a whole lot, but let's see if we can find an edge case where maybe that principle, I'm trying to see if there's any kind of principle that would maybe invalidate the claim, just to see kind of what you think about it. So let's say that the lost city of Atlantis is actually a lost continent. It's really big. It shows up from the bottom of the ocean. We have unclaimed land. No one's been there. And let's say like 10,000 people are living there. If, I don't know, 9,000 of those people all agreed to something about, hey, if you live on this land, this is how you're going to conduct business and this is how you're going to do things. And even if we agreed that like it was 100%, that's what we want people to do. Does that obligate the remaining 1,000 people who specifically did not like sign on the document? I know it's kind of a silly edge case, but what would you think about that?
Okay, so in order to form a government or society, you're saying, does 100% of the population actually have to agree to it in the first place?
Yeah, we'll start with 100 and we'll work our way down.
So does it need universal assent? That's a good question. I think if you get down to kind of like the term level societies, yeah, I think you do need universal assent in order to make it valid. Because if someone never agreed to it, they didn't give their consent, and they're not bound by it. If they happen to fall in that territory that this new country popped up in, they should probably leave. As far as the Constitution is concerned, I kind of see where I think you might be going with this, since not every citizen themselves personally ratified the Constitution. It's not binding on them. But the point is that each of the states, the colonies, had their own governments, their own representative governments. Their governments represented the people, and those governments ratified the Constitution. So the people in those states were already had government by consent in legislatures and stuff like that. So it didn't require 100% of each person in each colony to agree to it, because they already agreed to their state level governments. I don't know if that's where you're going with.
I have no particular direction at the moment. If you'd like us to go a particular direction, I'll do that in 7 minutes and 30 seconds, and then it'll be more of a, this is what I think. But right now I'm just trying to feel out kind of your principles underlying here. So if I understand the principle correctly, it goes something like this. People don't have a government or have recently broken away from one. They form maybe a local government to which they have close to 100% consent, and then from that they form like a state or area government, and they have maybe because all the authority kind of comes from the local government, and then it expands to like the state, and then the state goes, hey, we're gonna make a federal government, and then is that what makes it valid?
Kind of, yeah. So if these people in Atlantis, the rediscovered continent, it would be in what's called, I guess, the state of nature, where there is no government and there is no society, no political. Each person would be completely independent, completely equal, completely free, until they all got together and decided to consent to join as a corporate political society, and it would need universal assent, I think, if we're going to be consistent with our logic. But then once they had formed a government, whether it's if it's a pure democracy, then it still needs everyone's assent, but those don't really exist for good reason. It would probably be a republic or a representative democracy, and at that point, the government would have the power to, I guess, confederate with other republics, which is what we are, the Confederate Republic.
Gotcha. So all that hinges upon the local government having 100% assent, or does it not hinge upon that?
I would say, if we're going to be consistent, whatever the core, most basic unit of government is, would need universal 100% consent in order to be legitimate. If it didn't have consent, then it's illegitimate, in my opinion.
Okay. Gotcha. And then how does that play out over time? Like, let's assume 100% consent from generation 1776, but then generation 1776 is all died off. Maybe it's 1876. Like no one's lived past this point. Does it equally bind like the next generation down, and how would that mechanism function?
That's actually an interesting question. And I am pretty sure that kind of stuff is addressed in two treatises, and it's been a little while since I read it. I'm not a scholar, so I don't know the answer given. But I think it goes. What do I think?
Yeah,
I think, like, so for instance, we grew up in America, or born here. We didn't personally give our assent. We didn't consent to live here. We were born here. We didn't. Well, it's most of us didn't move here. But I think it goes something like, if you live in a government, if you're born under a government, you are technically free until you participate in it. And that's like taxes or using government services. You, in a sense, give consent by participation, which sounds a little weird, I guess. But I think that's kind of what you have to do, or else you would need literally every citizen to, once they reach 18 or something, to sign, like, do you want to be an American citizen? Which seems a little crazy.
Right. And what would you do if they said no? You just like throw them in the ocean, like, good luck, you know?
Hey, you know, kick them out, or they become, I don't know. I don't know. It's like, I don't know.
Right on. So I'm taking it out of, like, in my head, I'm taking it out of the realm of government and putting it into other situations, and I'm not sure how people would react to it. Like if I was a car dealer and I said, hey, everyone who lives in, let's just go with like my street, like you could probably form like a core governmental unit with like 50 people. So my street has about 50 houses on it. Hey, everybody, this is Kaysen's Car Shop, and by living here, you assent to buy a car from me. It'll be $10,000, and I'll send you a Volvo or whatever. That'd be a great deal, but whatever. Maybe it's not such a great car that I'm selling or whatever. But would you have any problem with that? Because it seems that would be applying the same principle.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with it. Not really. No.
And then as far, okay, cool. So we have and that's assuming everybody says, yes, I'll buy a car from you if I live in the area, like assuming 100% consent. If you had, say, 99% consent, would it still be valid in your view?
I think it'd be valid on everyone who consented to it, but the 1% who didn't, I don't think so. No.
Okay, great. I totally agree with that particular statement.
Is that one person who didn't consent before the government that you've just formed, he is equal to, independent of, all the other people. So just because 99 people decide they want to form a government, they can't force him to join, because nothing that comes from force is legitimate. Like, yeah, that's really what it's going to be.
Interesting, because I'm not sure if that's like, I agree with what you just said. Nothing that comes from force is legitimate. The initiation of force is a big no-no. Can't make people do stuff. But I'm trying to figure out a way to reconcile, like, at some point that 100% assent did not occur, or I would propose that it wouldn't, in the forming of like the Constitution. At some point, somebody disagreed along the line. So when or how, I guess is a better question, how can their consent be overridden and be binding upon their life, liberty, and property?
So you're saying, like, there were people who opposed the Constitution and didn't want to ratify it.
I would assume there's at least one. I would assume.
There's a whole bunch who didn't want to ratify the Constitution. And there's a whole bunch who only did it because of certain concessions made in the Constitution. So you're saying, is the Constitution binding on them because they never wanted it to begin with? Yes, because they had already consented to their state governments, and their state governments consented to the Constitution. Now, how did the state governments come into being? I honestly don't know. I'm not not a historian.
Okay. So if the state government was invalid, then would you say that the Constitution is not binding upon anybody inside that state?
Hypothetically, if a state government was formed illegitimately, which I don't know if that's the case. I honestly don't know.
I'm saying if it is or isn't. Just if it was.
If it was, then yeah. If we want to be consistent, yes.
Wowie wow. So much
And
constitutional talk, baby. And that's our time. My hope is that people can start listening to what other people are saying and try to understand like how they're thinking. That's kind of my goal.